Now, even though, yes, there is still one episode left to go, I think we can safely say that this third season of The Mandalorian has been rather different. Which isn't to necessarily say it's been terrible or even bad, but it has been different or not exactly what some fans, maybe a lot of fans, were expecting or even hoping for. I think many of us thought that, sure, as Favreau and Filoni had basically told us, the show would begin to expand to some degree in scope and scale, that new story elements would be introduced and other characters beyond Din and Grogu might be a bit more prominent than had been the case in previous seasons, where the perspective only ever left Din on rare occasions and only very briefly. Basically, I don't think, going into it, that anyone thought the story of Din, Djarin, and Grogu would not only no longer feel like it was at the heart of it all, but that that aspect of the show, what had driven it for 2 seasons, would feel almost non-existent. Like it was some sort of afterthought that every once in a while, they give us something in regards to it in order to remind us, yes, it's still a thing, or to appease those who are just here for the Grogu doing cute things. Though perhaps maybe I should say we thought it'd once again be one of the main focuses after the characters were reunited so quickly, and in another show brought back together again, of course in the Book of Boba Fett, before this third season ever began. I'd imagine many, or at least myself, thought that meant a continued focus on Din and Grogu's father-son-like relationship, that this was going to be yet another new important chapter in their story. And if that wasn't going to be the case, if the season wasn't going to have time to truly focus on them in a meaningful way, why rush the reunion? Why sacrifice a perfect parting between the two for a rushed, non-impactful reunion in another show that hasn't amounted to much of anything in this season? Why undo the oh-so-bittersweet Season 2 finale with a reunion that, instead of feeling emotionally satisfying after a long time apart for the characters, or maybe we first see, Din start to regress a bit due to the absence of Grogu, why do that reunion unless it maybe really was meddling from above, unless it really was Disney or Kennedy at Lucasfilm afraid of what the ratings would look like without him, or what merch sales would be like without their little green cash cow leading the way? And yes, I know Jon Favreau himself has said it was his decision, and I want to take him at face value. I don't want to question his integrity. But if it wasn't his decision, it's not like either he or Disney would want to say as much. They wouldn't want us to know they were putting toy sales above story. And they might be especially fearful of what would happen to the show without Grogu if, say, Din Djarin was also going to be sidelined quite a bit, which there's no denying has been the case this season. I mean, you can try and argue he is still a main character, but he isn't the main character anymore. Not like he was, not even close. Again, go back to the first 2 seasons and count up how much time we're not seeing the story from his perspective, or at the very least Grogu's, and it literally adds up to maybe a few minutes. It doesn't come anywhere remotely close to matching the amount of time we spent away from him in one single episode this season, that being the third one, which was primarily from the perspective of Dr. Pershing. We also don't have much of a character arc for him this season beyond the initial I have to bathe in the living waters, but once that's done, I no longer have anything else to do besides support Bo-Katan's quest to retake Mandalore and reunite their people, with him even pledging his loyalty to her in this past episode. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Bo-Katan's story has been bad this season. I'm not saying the show is awful now because she's pretty much literally been handed the lead. I think she has, for better or worse, been the highlight or best part of the season, and I've enjoyed her character in it. And if this were an offshoot series called The Book of Bo-Katan, I'd no doubt have less questions about what's going on here, and I'd probably, more or less, just sit back and enjoy. And I know this is where some will push their glasses up and say, well actually, Thor, this show is called The Mandalorian and doesn't specifically refer to who exactly that Mandalorian is, or the title can be fluid, even on an individual episode basis, and could refer to different Mandalorians in each episode. And though, yes, that is technically true, let's be real here. I don't think anyone would have made that argument that anyone other than Din and, or maybe Grogu, was the Mandalorian the title is referring to at any point in the first 2 seasons. And certainly most people I talk to about the show, those who maybe aren't more hardcore fans, and as I always say, personal anecdotes don't prove anything, but they are interesting to point out, But they've been confused as to why Din has not been front and center like he has been before. They don't get what's going on with this season and ask me all the time, what is going on? And what I think the most likely answer to that question is, and this is just my best guess, but when you consider The Mandalorian has been the most successful piece of Star Wars content to date in the Disney era, and I mean that in terms of overall acceptance and pop culture impact, not when it comes to flat out money made, the sequels do take the cake there. Anyway, when you consider the popularity of The Mandalorian and the fact that Disney is trying to create a successful streaming platform with Marvel and Star Wars doing the heavy lifting, if you will, of course they're going to take what works or what's been super successful and try to duplicate it or expand on it. Not unlike what Marvel does overall with the MCU, continually expanding on what has worked in the past. And so Star Wars is going to use The Mandalorian as a sort of jumping off point or even more shows, which we know is and has been happening. We also know now that they're building to a movie which will be the culmination of all of this in the Mando-verse time period. In other words, big plans that in a sense all sprung up from the adventures of Din and Grogu. But you obviously don't want to lose your audience in the process of building, right? You don't want people who really like Din and Grogu, who are here mainly for that story, to bail on you while you're doing all this building and expanding. You want to keep them around and vested in the new stuff. And the easiest way to get them invested in the new stuff is to do that through the characters they already like. Which is why, yeah, I do believe there's a really, really good chance it was Disney's decision, or Kennedy's at Lucasfilm, or both together, to bring back Grogu so soon and to have him in this third season when Din was not going to be front and center. I mean, there's a reason why you see the Armorer interacting with Grogu, why you see Bo-Katan interacting quite a bit with Grogu, because they want you to like those characters through Grogu. Not to mention his return allows for little hints and flashes of the show of old here and there, or entire episodes that feel like the first couple seasons. And that's done to hopefully keep those people who like those first two seasons here, to keep them happy as they get to know and again hopefully care about the new characters, and to tease us, such as with that flashback, that there is more to Grogu's story left to be told. In other words, I don't think there's anything truly nefarious going on, as I've seen some suggesting. I don't think this is some kind of bait and switch to bring in Bo-Katan and have her take over the show because they want a female lead now, and they lured you in with a male one. And don't get me wrong, as I said before, she has, at the very least, become a co-main character this season. I'm not denying that, as much as I'm saying I don't think this is part of some kind of agenda, beyond the agenda of growing this time period and growing Disney+. I also don't think it's impossible that they are having problems with Pedro Pascal behind the scenes, that his workload is greatly interfering with their filming schedule. There's also a rumor out there, and to be honest, there are many rumors out there when it comes to Pedro and the show and what's really going on. But there's a recent rumor that says Disney wanted to pay Pedro Pascal as a voice actor for season 1, or to basically pay him less, because he did little more than do the lines for the character, that he's rarely ever acting in the suit. And thus, Pedro insisted the helmet come off in season 1 at some point so he could be paid more. And honestly, I'm not sure about this one. If Pedro wanted to be paid more, he could just demand to be paid more or walk. But again, this is not the only rumor or report coming out, or that has come out, about Pedro being difficult. And there's no denying he is a very busy man and has a packed schedule. Seems like he's popping up everywhere these days, and Disney and Lucasfilm may not be fans of having to wait for him. There's probably a really good reason why it took 2 years to get to the next season of The Mandalorian, even if he is really just voicing lines which shouldn't require too much of his time. This then brings us to the biggest leak and rumor of them all, that Djarin will die in the season finale, thus forever solving the Pedro Pascal problem. And this would explain both why Bo-Katan is being pushed to the forefront over Din, so she can officially take over the show, as well as why Grogu was so quickly brought back. You don't want to miss out on the chance to ever reunite these two characters, or for Grogu to not be there when Din dies. And though I really can't see Disney and Lucasfilm wanting to get rid of this character or being willing to put up with some inconveniences when it comes to working with Pedro, especially when you consider him, or Din and Grogu, could easily be argued to be the saviors of Disney Star Wars. But this could all be in Pedro Pascal's court right now. Maybe he just doesn't want to do it anymore. His absence at Celebration felt a little strange to some. And maybe they won't pay him enough for the, albeit likely small amount of work, mainly voice work, that he does. Again, he's absolutely become a hot commodity in Hollywood as of late, so maybe these two just don't get along anymore. And so all I'm really saying here is that many things could be going on behind the scenes, and so I won't be completely stunned if Din Djarin happens to die in this finale, because again, there honestly does seem to be issues, and also there doesn't seem to be a whole lot left for his character to do at this point when you really think about it, beyond standing beside Bo-Katan and saying, "She's my queen," every so often. Though that said, it could be that, yeah, they are setting up some kind of co-leadership of Mandalore between her and him, and there are plenty of fans out there shipping these two that love this idea. But if they did this, you'd really think Din would have to give up on the whole never take off the helmet thing. And if they do that with the character, well, obviously Pedro Pascal will have to be on set a whole lot more often than he currently seems to be. And that doesn't seem to be what Pedro wants or has time for. Or who knows, maybe it is what he wants. Maybe he's unhappy that all he does is speaking lines and little else, and not because it means he gets paid less, but because he really likes the character and wants to do more with it. And yes, there's even been some clues this all could be what they're working towards, Bo and Din together with helmets off, I mean. With the 6th episode of this season, the Scooby-Doo CSI-like episode where they both work together to solve a mystery, which showcased how their individual strengths complemented each other. That could perhaps be the biggest piece of evidence to date, because beyond that, and the big fight between Bo and Axe at the end, the episode really didn't seem to accomplish a whole lot. And so if somehow this crazy theory about the armorer betraying them turns out to be true, and if it's in some twisted way because it's her following the creed to the exact letter, that she could never follow Bo-Katan because she removes her helmet and so she gets her killed along with any Mandos who would dare follow her, including some of her own like Paz Vizsla, who volunteered for the mission after she asked. Anyway, if Din sees what following the creed too closely can lead to, instead of just being honorable and loyal, which he talked to Bo about in this previous episode, it could maybe convince him that removing helmets is not something that necessarily needs to be followed anymore. And so, honestly, I see one of two things happening in the finale. Either Din dies, or he is willing to remove his helmet. I think we are at a crossroads for the character where it almost has to be one or the other with him at this point, or what else are you going to do with him? And if I had to guess, I think he's going to somehow see that following the creed too closely is flawed. And that, again, loyalty and honor are what it's all about when it comes to being a true Mandalorian. Not following rules to a T, because it's the only way. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about any and all of this. Do you think there's any chance Din Djarin dies? Is Pedro Pascal a problem behind the scenes? Or could you maybe see the helmet coming off and something starting between him and Bo? Or maybe none of the above will happen and it'll be something else entirely. And so whatever you think, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.